President Trump about to reshape the Middle East again, and given he gave in so quickly on tariffs to Mexico and to Canada, here's a question that many are asking. Is President Trump today playing 3D chess, or is he simply playing Snap? This is Ticker Hotshots. Hello, I'm Aaron Young. Great to be with you. Coming up on the program today, Donald Trump's Netanyahu meeting at the White House, a big one and a lot to come out of it. Also, these migrant flights to Guantanamo Bay, very similar to what we saw Australia do about 10 or 15 years ago to deal with the same crisis. Also, the fentanyl fight for tariffs, Canada, China and Mexico's role in all of this. And RFK Jr. is getting oh so close to the nomination for Health Secretary, a $1 trillion budget. And to help us break it all down, we're joined by Ticker's US Bureau Chief Veronica Dudo in New York. Great to see you.
Great to be here.
All right, so much to get through. Let's get started. Donald Trump is meeting with Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu at the White House. This is the headline. Trump sees Abraham Accords expansion, Gaza rebuild, with Netanyahu meeting on deck. Now, it marks Trump's first meeting with a world leader since his inauguration. The leaders are focused on expanding the Abraham Accords, aiming to include more countries in the historic peace agreement and discuss plans for rebuilding Gaza. They will also address the ongoing hostage situation with Hamas, with a focus on maintaining the ceasefire. Trump views Gaza as inhumane and estimates the rebuilding process could span up to 15 years. Veronica, a huge meeting at the White House. Also, President Trump's first major foreign power meeting. He's chosen Netanyahu. What do we know?
That's right, and make no mistake, it seems quite deliberate that the first foreign leader to visit newly installed President Donald Trump would be the Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu. So, of course, a lot is moving very quickly. We have heard from the Prime Minister that he continues to have his goals set in mind. So it's going to be interesting because he is now dealing with a very different administration. Of course, under Biden-Harris, we saw a lot of meetings, constantly listening to the then Secretary of State Antony Blinken, constantly flying to the Middle East for these talks, and really not a whole lot of movement. And a lot of people, would certainly point to when then President-elect Trump said that the hostages would need to be released before his inauguration, or that there would be hell to pay. And so very quickly, we did start to see those hostages being released. He has talked about his envoy, who have also been holding some of those meetings in the past, couple of weeks to try to get that done. But moving forward, where will there be in terms of peace in the Middle East? We know that President Trump also just, launched a massive campaign against Iran. He's very serious about their nuclear capabilities. He feels like that is also playing a major role in all of this. So it will be interesting to see, following a lot of these meetings and press conferences.
Yeah, well, before Netanyahu, headed off to the United States, here's what he had to say about that meeting.
I'm leaving for a very important meeting with President Trump in Washington. The fact that this would be President Trump's first meeting with a foreign leader since his inauguration is telling. I think it's a testimony to the strength of the Israeli-American alliance. It's also a testimony to the strength of our personal friendship. That friendship and that cooperation has already yielded important results for Israel in the Middle East, including the historic Abraham Accords that President Trump led, and which brought 4 historic peace treaties between Israel and its Arab neighbors. And this meeting will deal with important issues, critical issues facing Israel and our region, a victory over Hamas, achieving the release of all our hostages, and dealing with the Iranian terror axis and all its components, an axis that threatens the peace of Israel, the Middle East, and the entire world.
We know that the US is the strongest ally for Israel, and a very important one as well, particularly what has happened over the past couple of years since the October 7 Hamas attack on Israel there as well. We know hostages is the #1 priority for Israel, to get them back from Hamas, from Gaza, and President Trump saying it will take 10 to 15 years, describing Gaza as a bomb site.
We heard a lot of questions in the Oval Office. They were sitting in front of a roaring fire, the two leaders, and they allowed, a press availability. And they kept asking, how do you know that the people would not want to go back? And we did hear President Trump saying, have you seen the photos and the videos? It's rubble. There's nothing there. So talking about what happens next, really, there needs to be, an end to the conflict. So that has to be the first goal. And of course, we're seeing those phases of the hostages being brought home. We also have heard from families saying that they just want to have burials in their own religions in terms of wanting to have the bodies even returned. They're, asking for that. So it's a terrible situation. It's extremely sad. It's one that, we know. There's also a lot of domestic pressure for Benjamin Netanyahu. This is back at home to not end the war, to keep it going. They have their own goals. So it is a very tightrope that the prime minister is walking in terms of needing to, keep those lawmakers appeased at home domestically, but also as he tries to sit and negotiate with President Trump in terms of what the two allies can do moving forward.
Then there is the question about Iran. Before Benjamin Netanyahu arrived at the White House, as you say, Donald Trump held a wide-ranging news conference. He seems to be doing it every day now at the desk at the Oval Office there. Here's what he had to say about Iran, this drawing a lot of attention.
It's Iran and their proxies who have threatened to retaliate against you and your team by killing you guys for taking out Soleimani.
Well, they haven't done that, and that would be a terrible thing for them to do, not because of me. If they did that, they would be obliterated. That would be the end. I've left instructions. If they do it, they get obliterated. There won't be anything left. And they shouldn't be able to do it. And Biden should have said that, but he never did. I don't know why, lack of intelligence, perhaps. But he never said it. If that happens to a leader, or close to a leader, frankly, if you had other people involved also, you would call for total obliteration of a state that did it. That would include Iran. So
there you go. Obviously, in the lead up to the election, we'll all recall that Iran was pointed at by US intelligence agencies for a secret plot to kill President Trump. We know of 2, possibly 3 attempts on President Trump's life that we can all think about, of course, including Butler, Pennsylvania, and then at his golf course too. Very, very strong warning to Iran. You would hate to be going into a negotiation with a president that his own intelligence agencies say that a few months ago you were trying to kill.
Absolutely, and that's again a very decisive, it says that statement exactly, what his sentiment is. He's saying even if he is taken out, that there are plans left. If he is no longer there, that it will still happen. They will be obliterated. So again, it's a very clear message to Iran, along with what he is doing in terms of the sanctions and the maximum pressure campaign. So he is not joking around. I was speaking to a journalist based in Israel who was saying that, it's no secret that Iran looks at Israel as the little Satan and the United States as the big Satan. I mean, there are so many times we see the American flag being burned in the streets in Tehran and other places in Iran. Of course, they chant death to America. So they are certainly not a friend of the United States. President Trump knows that. He realizes that there is a lot to do when it comes to his foreign policy in the Middle East, because there's so many moving parts. And we've talked about this and the potential for Iran to, be the backer of some of these smaller terrorist groups. So it is an extremely complicated issue.
This is Benjamin Netanyahu, the Israeli Prime Minister, arriving at the White House there. Historic pictures as this happens. Now, we know that the relationship between Netanyahu and Trump, very different, both very strong-willed men, strong-willed leaders. Talk to us about that, Veronica, because the relationship between Trump and Netanyahu is very different than the relationship of Biden and Netanyahu, which we know had been strained quite a few times, particularly about the number of innocent lives taken in Gaza as Israel responded there as well. We know that the International Criminal Court too has a warrant out for Netanyahu's arrest, and there are a lot of questions about that and what that means, given that we've seen Donald Trump announcing that there will be a pullback too from many of these UN groups from the United States, including now the UN Human Rights Council.
Well, the hypocrisy needs to stop when we are seeing only select leaders and countries, being taken up on some of these allegations and charges. And it's very clear that in communist countries and with dictators, there are things that are being done that are far worse and nothing is ever said. And that is where the institution or the agency, it's not doing its job if it's only cherry picking certain people, entities, and countries. And so that's kind of what we're seeing President Trump say, that it needs to be restructured or it needs to be fair. But putting that aside, when we look at Joe Biden and Benjamin Netanyahu's relationship, we saw oftentimes the prime minister asking for certain things that he needed immediately while they were in the thick of this war. I mean, he was surrounded from multiple sides, seeing these attacks on the border, whether it was with Hamas or the Houthis or Hezbollah. And so, obviously, famously, we saw these strikes with the cell phones and pagers and other things that that Israel felt that they needed to do moving forward. So when you look at that relationship, the Biden-Harris administration was really accused of slow walking a lot of things, or, delivering what they had asked for months later. And there was just a lot of talks and really just no action. I think you're going to see a very different situation between Trump and Netanyahu.
And speaking of, here's some audio from inside where Trump is talking about the Nobel Peace Prize.
What would happen if you hear from the Israelis?
They will never give me a Nobel Peace Prize.
What would happen if the Israelis?
I deserve it, but they will never give it to me.
I deserve it, but they'll never give it to me. All right, let's move on. The US government is set to commence flights transporting migrants to Guantanamo Bay. This is the headline from the Wall Street Journal as the Trump administration aims to increase the detention capacity there from 120 to 30,000 immigrants. The controversial migrant detention centre, operational since the 1990s, has drawn criticism for its conditions and treatment of detainees. This takes me back to a conversation we had in this country in Australia throughout the late 90s, which was what to do about, as they were referred to, boat people, illegal asylum seekers who were trying to arrive. They were paying people smugglers to take really risky journeys where many, many people lost their lives. And for quite a long time, it was a hugely controversial deal to be sending them to places like Christmas Island, Nauru, where the Australian government built detention centres, which essentially was offshore for processing to make sure that they didn't have the rights that the UN gives them if they arrive at a mainland. And as you can imagine, those on the left said this is inhumane and goes against what the UN is saying. Those on the right, and then eventually on the left, said, well, we're trying to save lives because people shouldn't be taking these journeys, and most people should be arriving by plane if they have legitimate asylum seeker questions. But it did lead to many say that a lot of people were left squandering for a very long time. Having children in these detention centres became hugely controversial, but it does seem that the US and the UK as well are having the same debate that Australia had about 15 years ago. And we went through this period, Veronica, where the Liberal National Coalition would get in and they would bring back offshore processing, and then the Labor Party would get in and they would ditch it. Eventually, the left got on board and realised it may not be what they want, but it was the only thing that worked.
So for people who may not be familiar, what was the end result?
Well, right now there are detention centres and processing centres that are occurring, and we have fewer boats that have arrived. Of course, whenever there is a policy brought in that questions the legitimacy, the people smugglers straight away jump on and they start selling tickets on these dodgy, risky boats to cross over the straits, and we have seen people die. I remember during the Gillard government where she started to roll back some of the policies of the Liberal government, and a boat arrived, smacked smashed up off the shore, and all of those people were killed. And all of a sudden, sentiment changed from one being about controversy and became one of there is no other choice, and that's where the policy stands. And in fact, the former Australian Prime Minister, Tony Abbott, has found himself in the UK actually advising the British government on what to do, and that's where they have been following a very similar path and similar controversy to what we're now seeing in the United States.
And as you mentioned, it's something that a lot of countries do struggle with. And so when we're seeing these migrants, we've been told by this administration, also the border czar, Tom Homan, who's been leading the effort, of course, now the new Director of Homeland Security, Secretary Kristi Noem, that right now this first phase, it's the worst first. So they're looking for the criminals, and not just those who have crossed into the United States illegally. Of course, that counts as a crime, but they're talking about the ones who are, running the drugs, the fentanyl, the illegal arms, human trafficking. So these are the types of people that they are going to be moving to Guantanamo Bay. It's also very interesting, or potentially even noteworthy, that during President George H.W. Bush and also Bill Clinton, they had some 50,000 Haitians and Cubans who were housed in Guantanamo Bay in 1991 through 1996 as they were waiting until they were allowed into the United States. So it's not something that hasn't been done. It's not something that's new. And so we are being told that those, first flights have been, taking off so far to see this, new type of situation unfold.
Yeah, so Australia is still sending asylum seekers, these refugees, to Nauru for processing if they arrive in Australia. And it was Papua New Guinea as well. It's now Nauru. Now, on the downside, it costs about $1 billion a year. It's pretty expensive and will be even more expensive for Guantanamo Bay, as we know. But also, it has been controversial because of the UN Human Rights Council describing it as an indictment, a damning indictment on Australia's international obligations. Now, this comes at a perfect time because today, President Trump signed an executive order essentially ending United States support for the UN HRC, the Human Rights Council. This is a huge deal. I would say that of all of the things that have happened over the past couple of weeks, this is one of the big ones. Here's Donald Trump.
So I've always felt that the UN has tremendous potential. It's not living up to that potential right now. It really isn't, hasn't for a long time. It has, there are great hopes for it, but it's not being well run, to be honest, and they're not doing the job. A lot of these conflicts that we're working on should be settled, or at least we should have some help in settling them. We never seem to get help. That should be the primary purpose of the UN, the United Nations. And again, it's got great potential, and based on the potential, we'll continue to go along with it, but they got to get their act together.
A really, really strong indictment from President Trump against the UN. I mean, he's spoken about the whole UN there. Obviously, the US isn't pulling out of the UN, but they are coming out of the World Health Organization. They are coming out of the Human Rights Council as well. These are significant bodies that make up the UN. Veronica, as you know, many people, many conservatives in particular, have had a big problem with the UN over, gosh, I don't know, my entire life, I think, where the Security Council has come under a lot of criticism, where Iran being on the Human Rights Council, in fact running it, has seemed ridiculous to many, given their human rights record as well. It feels like the US is paying for a lot, copping a lot of criticism as well, and the organisations have become activist and also very, very political. And now Trump is essentially doing what a lot of conservative leaders have said they would, have wanted to do, but have not done. What do you think?
Absolutely. And this is where we are hearing President Trump say the hypocrisy needs to end. I mean, if you look at the United States, so they would be paying through the United Nations Human Rights Council in terms of aid, and then you're trying to broker peace and still sending aid, for maybe the Middle East, if you're looking at the Gaza situation, for example, to Israel to try to help out. So this is, constant money that's going out. Obviously, a lot was being reported on when there were members who were part of the council's one on the ground organization, and they were members of Hamas. And so where is that money really going? And so I think that's, really the root of what you're seeing from this administration for the accountability, and they want the receipts. They want to see what's happening, what's going on. They're talking about, sunlight can be the best disinfectant. I mean, that's also what you're seeing with Elon Musk. And, we are seeing a lot of liberals, a lot of Democrats very upset. And it's saying, well, what's wrong with just having a conversation to say maybe there's a better way moving forward? But, to have this, hysteria over some of these things, it will be okay for sure. But
I'm detecting with Trump a negotiating tactic that you can say is the same as what we've seen with Mexico and Canada, which is to shoot first, ask questions later. Why, playing devil's advocate here, why do you think Trump didn't decide to negotiate with the UN, with the Human Rights Council, with the World Health Organization to say, we're really not happy with the direction. We're really not happy with the WHO. There were legitimate questions about its connection with China in the early days, particularly of COVID, and why it didn't point the finger at China quite strongly. Many say that is because they're funded so significantly by China. But why isn't Trump choosing to negotiate before pulling the pin? He's essentially announcing, signing these executive orders to get out of these things. But we all know that the UN Human Rights Council is still really important. So is the World Health Organization. He wants change, but is it easier to make change from the inside or the outside?
Well, that's going to be something very interesting to see. But if you are cutting off funding, at least from the United States' standpoint, maybe they can fill those gaps and keep going. But, it is a point to say that if you're still a player, you can still be a part of, trying to have discussions about the future and where things go. But I wouldn't discount the fact that President Trump gets, his daily briefings, right? He's also privy to a lot of confidential, top secret information. And so while he may not be obviously talking about that, maybe you can look to some of his actions to see. But I think you're seeing that enough is enough. When he is tasked with really trying to rein in the spending, to try to balance budgets, and to look at what has been done so far, that we have heard these cries that things need to go in a better direction. People are not happy with the information that's coming out. I mean, even outright lies sometimes from the World Health Organization, and listening to some of the press conferences and what's being said, people are really shocked and appalled. And so it could be a negotiating tactic to just, pull the funding, let them come back to him and say, okay, now we're willing to have that conversation. That could, definitely be something that's on the horizon.
Fentanyl is becoming a central issue in US trade negotiations, particularly as Trump targets Mexico and China with these tariffs. This is the headline today from the Wall Street Journal, how fentanyl became central to Trump's tariffs. And that's what we're talking about, because the US insists that both nations must combat the drugs production and also trafficking. Now, over the past year, overdose deaths have declined, but remain significantly higher than they were a decade ago, fentanyl contributing to the crisis. And in response, Mexico is deploying 10,000 National Guard members to the US border to try and curb this sort of trafficking. The relationship seems to be all about fentanyl, at least that's what we're being told. But surely this is about US dominance and also those asylum seekers who are gaining entry to the United States from places like South America, and in some cases doing so via Canada.
So it seems like this can really be a twofold issue, where now you have 10,000 troops stationed on America's southern border and also 10,000 stationed on America's northern border from the neighboring countries, meaning Mexico and, of course, Canada. So that certainly is a deterrent from that side coming into the United States. So you can look at this as some sort of a public service announcement, or maybe even a public relations campaign where people are seeing those images. We are seeing caravans making a U-turn, turning around, because word is getting out that you cannot cross the border. You will not be easily allowed in. That, this administration certainly does mean business. But when you talk about the fentanyl overdose statistics being a bit down, the other issue, and this is what we heard testimony on Capitol Hill today, and we have when the committees have been holding these meetings from those angel families, angel parents, and they are people that lost children. And this was never a case of them being hooked on drugs, being, drug addicts or looking for it. This was just a mistake. This is usually younger people who are at a party. They're given some pills. They're told that it's something else. I mean, we listened to a doctor, this was also today, saying that in a packet of sugar, the amount that's in there can kill 10,000 people. That's how potent fentanyl is. And they're also mixing it now with animal drugs so that Narcan, which is what's given to reverse the effects, doesn't work. So, what is the thinking behind this? If you're trying to sell drugs, then you would most likely want repeat customers. And so when you're administering these types of pills and dosages, they're just completely fatal, right away. And so that is the larger question. This is now a national security issue. We know the fentanyl is being made in China. We know that it's coming across the border, both from the north and the south. And so it's not just people who are taking drugs. These are also people who are, by accident. We see during Halloween, Valentine's Day, other holidays where sometimes candy is given out in schools that the local sheriff's department or law enforcement puts out these, PSAs to remind parents just to be careful, because we are seeing these nefarious actors, making fentanyl-laced candies specifically targeted for children.
All right, RFK Jr. is one step closer to becoming the next Secretary of Health and Human Services after a crucial vote in the Senate Finance Committee approved his nomination. Pivotal Republican Senator backed Kennedy with assurances to uphold current vaccine recommendations and maintain public access to vital health services. His nomination faces a full Senate vote soon, where he can lose a few Republican votes if all Democrats oppose him. Now, if confirmed, Kennedy will oversee a $1.7 trillion department that regulates essential health policies. It's been put that RFK Jr. could be, for the Democrats, given he used to be one, the best candidate that the Democrats will ever get. And there are some fears that if they don't get him over the line, maybe with a protest vote, but enough to maybe get him there, then Trump will hit him with someone that they really hate.
That's a very interesting thought process. Certainly, for sure, there could be somebody who is extremely conservative, very, very Republican. But it was fascinating to listen to the Finance Committee today. All of the Democrats, including Senator Warren, Senator Sanders, and others, all say no. But needless, the Republicans, they had enough votes to vote him out of committee. So now it goes to the full Congress to be voted on. We're thinking so far it could be potentially next week. But I talked to some lawmakers and they said that they have never seen such support on Capitol Hill for these hearings. There are so many American moms who are supporting him, and that is what that MAHA movement is, which is Make America Healthy Again. And Aaron, for you in Australia, it's very different in the United States. It's kind of like the secret is out, where moms know that these huge food corporations and companies are making food that have more healthy ingredients for other countries that have stricter health laws than here in the United States.
It's such a great point, and it's something that I think that we don't think about in other countries. So I was hearing someone talk the other day about when you get a loaf of bread in the United States, it lasts a month. Now, if you buy a loaf of bread in Australia, after about 3 days, you're thinking about breadcrumbs. 4 days, you're thinking about bread and butter pudding, although I think about that all the time. By day 5, you're chucking it out because it's starting to go moldy. You wouldn't even feed the dog, right? But in the US, what are you putting in there? Then there's the fact that fries at some of our favourite restaurants have these trans fats that we just don't allow in countries like Australia. Yet it's a crucial ingredient, and it seems that the marketing and the taste and the longevity of the product is put ahead of what you can actually eat and consume as human beings. Now, that's a legitimate question. I think that the problem with RFK Jr. is his previous thoughts on vaccines.
So we have heard from him where he talks about saying that he does believe there is a space for vaccines, but he feels that it should be up to individuals to make those decisions. So he was repeatedly asked during the beginning of some of these confirmation hearings about that. Is he going to end vaccines? Is he going to take those rights away? And he has continued to say no. He is an attorney. He has been working in this section, this health area for decades, and continues to just champion some other issues that he's really looking to.
I don't know. I've got to jump in there because I feel that there are some things that, for example, a parent with a particular view, a parent with a mental health challenge who has some unreasonable dislike of a vaccine. We think about polio, we think about some others that have really been proven to make a positive change. If you are someone who gets to make a decision about vaccines on behalf of someone in your care, really that is the point of the government, to make sure that they step in, just as we want to make sure that children are looked after. I don't know about that. I do think that there are legitimate questions about being forced into taking the COVID vaccine. I think a lot of people who have taken it say if they could go back in time, the whole handling, the way that we were essentially told that if we didn't get numbers to 94, 95% of the population, we wouldn't get our freedom back. That, in hindsight, feels really weird, sitting where we are today, being told that the vaccines would prevent us from being able to give COVID to other people has not turned out to be accurate. We think about how AstraZeneca now no longer is available because of the health concerns that we've seen there. There are great questions that, as journalists, we should be able to ask, but there are also points where if we say it should be up to human beings, well, gosh, imagine if we did that across the board, what things would look like.
Well, so a couple of things, here in the United States, obviously we have long heard from Democrats, my body, my choice. That's something, very much so usually brought up in the conversation of also have religious liberties. And so if it's against your religion, you do not have to receive any vaccine. So that's something else here in the United States. So we do have choices. So when it comes to RFK and what he's talking about with this, he's just simply saying, let's look at it. Obviously, when you look at the efficacy rates, we've long been told from doctors and scientists that sometimes it takes 5 years to do a proper study. So when you look at the rollout specifically of those COVID vaccines, there was not a 5-year study done. So that's a whole nother issue, talking about exactly how that all went down. And that's what I'm referring to.
I feel that that is something that I think history will look back on unfavourably and say, what on earth were we thinking? But there was such pressure because of the concern of people dying and the need to reopen from those lockdowns that essentially government said, hey, yeah, it needs 5 years, but they said that really since DNA was first discovered, that the mRNA vaccines go back to that, and therefore these are vaccines that have been in the works for 20 or so years. It's just the first time that they're being used, which is why they were able to get them out so quickly. It is good to have people who are able to ask questions, and obviously there's always going to be the Trump test. And you would have to say, and this is a question for you, when we talk about these secretaries of health, foreign secretary, of course, secretary of state, how much power do they have? Because it always feels like in the Trump administration, the buck stops with the president.
Meaning what? When things go right?
Well, let's say, for example, if RFK was to be an anti-vaxxer when he gets the role and was to try and push through some things that don't pass what we call the pub test, will he be able to, or will President Trump be able to step in and say, I don't think so?
Well, I suppose with any administration, we've always seen, a president being the ultimate, kind of like when you're looking at companies, the CEO really making those choices. But, he has repeatedly said... But how much
leeway will a secretary have under the Trump administration compared to others, is my point.
Well, we saw his first administration, they had a lot of leeway. And so I think it will be, time will tell. But you have to understand, they're all really under the same amount of thinking. They've been huddled together having these meetings at Mar-a-Lago. We heard from Tulsi Gabbard. She also made it out of her committee today, kind of just saying that as soon as the election was called, they got right to it. They were having meetings down in Mar-a-Lago. They were moving forward. They have an agenda. In the first 3 weeks, we haven't seen so much activity coming out of the Oval Office in a very long time. And so they really have had this kind of planned. So it will be interesting to see the leeway of it. But obviously, Trump does like to be involved. So I do think, though, that they are all on somewhat of the same page with a lot of these different initiatives.
Yeah, well, one of the most liberal lunatics ever to have run for office was what Trump said about RFK 9 months ago. So we'll see how they get along. Obviously, things change once a nomination is all sorted. But yeah, it is certainly going from being the third candidate in that election race, running as an independent, to all of a sudden they made up, went on stage at the convention and bringing RFK. How important do you think it was for Trump to win the election to have RFK jump from being a third-party candidate to being on board the Trump train?
Well, I think that should really show you the sentiment of the seriousness of all of these. And you have Tulsi Gabbard, she was a Democrat. Same with RFK. I mean, we heard a lot of pushback from his family members, including Caroline Kennedy. I mean, just, really long lists that were, really not quite flattering. And so if they are able, these Democrats, to say that they are behind what they believe in, and that it doesn't have to be a label, it doesn't have to be a name or a specific party, that it's more of an idea when you're looking at these morals, values, how you see things moving forward for the country, and that you can be a bigger person and come together for the greater good, to see that through. I certainly think the American people see that, and that's what they want. They want the adults back in the room. They don't want to see a lot of infighting and things just not getting done. Every day they have to get up, the American people, and go to their job and figure out a lot of things. And when you come and you look at Washington, D.C. and government, and there's another task force, and the budget still isn't balanced, and, let's make another committee and spend more money, they're kind of saying, well, what the heck's going on? I have to be responsible in my life and figure things out. Why can't the politicians do it in D.C.? And I really think that was the mandate that you saw with this election, with President Trump and, the people that were surrounding him and supporting him, winning the popular vote as well as the Electoral College.
Veronica, host of In America Today right here on Ticker. Appreciate your thoughts as always. Talk soon.
Thanks, Aaron.